right, so we want to get to some questions, and we have questions for both Ethan and for Hollis French, who's coming on the second half of the show. And a couple of these are specific to you. So
I'm flattered.
So I'm going to ask you both similar questions so people can see what's important to them. Ethan, what's your plan to get Anchorage fast internet?
Anchorage is going to have to hook into the bush.
Yeah.
By the time I'm done.
Pebble Mine, yes or no? And please no wishy-washy political BS.
No.
Your answer is no.
Yes, and I've said it before, and there's a lot of great mining prospects in the state, a lot of good reasons to do it, but Pebble Mine doesn't add up, particularly given that Frank Murkowski gutted the procedural protections that might have given the people in the area the ability to weigh in a meaningful way about what kind of development occurred there. And I think that under the current circumstances, there's just no way it can exist. And I say that having fished commercially in Bristol Bay.
Great. Right now, we're looking at 404C of the EPA to help shut it down. If you were in a governor position,
404C.
It's one of the provisions in the EPA about clean water. So, you know, we often see. We've got Sean Parnell and Mayor Sullivan suing the federal government over health care, and the polar bears and the belugas. And it's like, really? They're just wasting money.
I don't get that these guys that hate lawyers employ them so often.
Yeah. Well, there's that. Will we ever see realistic medical marijuana system? Right now, all we have are cards, and they don't smoke well.
I didn't know you could roll the cards, but I would like to see us move forward in a way that recognizes the medical virtues of marijuana, of any other kind of pharmaceutical, or anything that can alleviate suffering and bring comfort to people.
Great. I think it could be a great industry for Alaska.
Well, there's, you know,
it would be a pipeline, but like a different kind of pipe. And I think we might be able to shut down the other one.
Well, you know, in all seriousness, when you travel through the interior, there's a lot of agricultural specialists who are interested not necessarily in marijuana cultivation, but want to talk more about what we can do with hemp. Yeah. And I think that anytime you have any governmental prohibitions about growing things, you ought to be very careful about what also gets caught up in those prohibitions.
Where are you at in regards to chewing and coal?
Until you can show me that coal can be done clean, I don't think we ought to proceed on that front. And I'm all for doing the research, but we're not in a position right now where coal can be clean.
All right. With regards to development of renewable energy resources, how do you view Alaska's future in terms of, one, satisfying local energy needs, and two, the creation of family wage jobs in the manufacturing renewable energy components?
We're going to be a world leader in renewable energy. The way I see it, 10 or 15 or 25 or 50 years from now, every single village, every community in the state is going to be energy self-sufficient, taking advantage of the renewable energy resources that are available there. There's more than 100 villages that can do a lot with wind. I've worked on wind diesel projects in western Alaska, some of the global leaders on that front. We've got geothermal. That is the envy of even Iceland, which is 95% powered by geothermal. We've got biomass prospects all across the state in days like today, and we've got solar. We've got 90% of America's tidal energy. We've got 50% of America's wind energy. We've got rivers. We've got streams. We've got everything. What we don't have is a concerted champion in Juneau, in the governor's office, to make sure that we have these resources. Because the problem with not using renewable resources is that every time you import $1 worth of diesel, you're exporting that dollar, you're exporting that job, you're making it harder for communities to be sustainable. And that's something we need to remedy quickly.
I agree. Question, I'm a fan of ACES. Is there a chance that you, Ethan, will leave it intact?
Well, I like the optimism of that I'm going to be governor and will have the ability to do things. What I want to see...
I mean, that's cheesy. Don't go there. Just answer.
That was the preparatory. You get the comment, and now I get to answer it. I get to have the asides, too. Look, I've said all along that ACES is the default part of the oil revenue system that I envision, and we've got to build forward. No oil revenue system lasts forever and ever. I mean, the economic limit factor lasts about 10 or 15 years. PPT had a shorter lifespan than that, but you look at the history of revenue systems, they dissolve over time. One of the concerns that I think people who support ACEs should have in mind is if you don't have a legislature and a governor who are strongly supportive of what they consider to be the best provisions of ACEs, ACEs is going to be undercut year after year after year. And you're going to be left with a shell of what we have. ACEs was also built, as one of my Democratic supporters who's in the legislature says, ACEs was built out of compromise at a time where you had Republicans in majorities in the House and you had a Republican governor. There are better systems that we can have. And if we have the right system in place, not only will Alaska have a secure economic footing in terms of our fiscal future, we'll have the ability to go to industry and negotiate from a position of strength. And that's where I want us to be. We spent too long, 50 years as a state, to still be treated like a colony. And if we have the right revenue system where we can be a sovereign and act like a sovereign, we can be in control of our future.
Senator Begich is hosting an Alaska World Affairs Council forum with U.S. Ambassador to Croatia. The event is scheduled to be at the Hilton, forcing attendees to cross a picket line. How do you feel about this decision?
I have honored the picket lines at the Sheraton at the Hilton, and will continue to do so.
What's the difference? Oh, that one's going to take way too long. How do you feel about capping the permanent fund dividend, say at $1,000, and using any excess money to fund health care?
I don't like the idea of capping the permanent fund at any amount. Those sort of artificial limitations distort what the permanent fund is all about. I do think we need to do more with healthcare than we've done with healthcare. I mean, the Parnell approach of cutting Denali kid care and saying no to everything isn't a healthcare plan. We need to have genuine healthcare reform in the state. And the problem in Alaska isn't the same as it is in the lower 48. It's not just an access to insurance, it's an access to genuine healthcare. And we can do a lot better than we've done. And anyone who's witnessed the tragedy of people unable to get actual health care in this state, and I think those of us who've lived here for any period of time know people who've suffered loss on account of that. We've got to do better, and saying no, which seems to be the Parnell plan, is just not good enough.
Thoughts on BP's Liberty Island?
I got thoughts on BP, generally speaking. You know, I don't know enough about the technology of Liberty Island to venture a strong opinion. But one of the things that we haven't seen is what's going to happen to BP in Alaska in the future, because the BP that exists here today is very different than the one that existed prior to the blowout in the Gulf. And we've got to make provisions so Alaska is ready for the change that's going to come. Whether BP sells its assets, whether BP starts to limit its investment in this state, we've got to do what we can do to protect the jobs that BP has. We need to do what we can to make sure that the gas that it currently has under its control is available for development of our gas prospects. Again, this is an instance where standing still hurts the state.
What about this? And the next question was, what about Alaska buying BP's stake?
You know, I'm very interested in finding alternative ways of financing Alaska's participation in the oil industry. And there are proposals that I have that I look forward to unveiling in the future, which I would love to come on the show at some point and explain.
What's your stance on Prop 1 and Prop 2?
No and no.
What is your plan to get revenue sharing back for the cities?
Look, I think the more revenue sharing we have, the better it is. And one of the proposals that Governor Hickel had years and years ago was to do a community dividend. And if we can find a way of sharing Alaska's oil wealth, not just with individuals for the permanent fund dividend, but with the communities through a community dividend, that's something that should happen. When community dividends were cut years ago and eliminated as the round of budget cutting, which is what happened, that's why it went away. I fought against it. I've always stood up for community dividends or community revenue sharing, and I think we've got to build it back up into a sustainable program. It's nice in Anchorage, it's critical here where it goes towards property tax relief, but in communities that don't have access to revenue through taxation of its own people, those funds are absolutely essential for community survival. And if we don't have sustainable communities in rural Alaska, I think we're failing one of the state's moral obligations.
What is the biggest difference between you and Hollis French? What is the biggest difference between you and Sean Parnell?
You know, I've known Hollis for a long time, and we campaigned together. And as I tell folks, I worked hard to get him into the Senate, and I'm working hard to keep him there. I think that on the broad range of issues, there's a great deal of similarity. And rather than compare and contrast, I think that I've got a strong vision of where I think the state needs to go. I've got the ability to go toe-to-toe with Sean Parnell, because I just don't think Sean Parnell is tough enough to be Alaska's governor. I think
Sean Parnell hasn't won a primary yet.
He has not won a primary, and I've won two.
Well, the point is that this race right now is Tuesday. People are going to show up and vote. And I mean, I know what the polls are on Sean Parnell, but he hasn't won it yet.
He hasn't won it yet, and I haven't won it yet. So I think it's presumptuous of either one of us to say who's going to be facing whom. But it's a question of vision. It's a question of ability to prevail in a general election. It's the fact that I'm not beholden to anybody in the legislature, not beholden to a governor. I don't have to worry about going back and facing anybody. I can call things the way I see them. I've got a strong sense of what this state needs to do, ways of linking the economy, linking of energy issues, linking of education issues, and I'm willing to stand on my record and on my vision.
So what do you think the top two problems are in this state? Like, if you could just sum up, what are the top, like, what would be priorities for you?
I think complacency and mediocrity are the biggest problems we have. We're not doing anything. We're standing still as a state. And you look at two examples of this. One is the energy issue. We have the highest cost of energy of any state in the union. We produce energy. We ought to have low-cost energy here, and there hasn't been enough initiative to change that condition. I think if we want to move towards renewable energy, there's one basic thing that has to happen. Independent power producers have to know what the rules are. Independent power producers currently don't know what the rules are. That inhibits investment in renewable energy. That prevents the communities from becoming sustainable. It prevents investors from participating in changing Alaska's economy so we can add value to resources, which is one of the keys to economic development. You look at the educational front, you've got 40% of kids who start high school today in this state don't finish it. That's unacceptable. That's absolutely unacceptable. And I've listened to people for long periods of time saying, yes, we have to have universally available preschool. We can't have a K through 12 system that fails to recognize that not all kids are on a university path. We've got to have more vocational and technical training. But fundamentally, we need an educational system that respects each child, each student as an individual, and finds ways of igniting that child's passion for learning and that child's personal abilities. If we do that, then we can rewrite how history happens to Alaska. Because I don't know what those untapped potentials are going to yield, but I know that wasting them and squandering them is not an acceptable thing for us to be doing.
How hard do you think it is for teachers in this state when they're constantly, being told they're part of greedy unions and we put so much on them to fix social ills? I mean, what do you? This is my last question for you. Should teachers be paid like rock stars or what?
I think if teachers were paid like rock stars, we would absolutely change how education occurs in this country. People say all the time, kids are our most precious commodity. Let's start treating the people that we entrust them with appropriately. And I say this, I've got family that are teachers here in the Anchorage School District. My kids are in the Anchorage School District, and it is something I see on a daily basis. There are a lot of terrific teachers out there. They don't receive the level of appreciation they should receive. They don't receive the level of support they should receive. It's one of the reasons why we need to have a defined benefit retirement system. It's one of the reasons why we need to make sure there's small class sizes. There's so many things we can do with an educational system that we need to do.
But we're out of time.
And it's been a pleasure.
It's been fun. Thanks for coming in, Ethan. We'll be back.